In the stark anonymity of a bustling Chicago street, a 12-year-old homeless boy witnessed a white police officer struck by a speeding vehicle in the heart of an intersection. Despite the inherent risks of misjudgment and suspicion, the boy rushed to offer aid, only to be mistakenly identified as the perpetrator. It was not until the injured officer regained consciousness and revealed the truth that the city truly grasped a profound lesson. Compassion requires no permission to exist. It was a crisp autumn evening in downtown Chicago. The wind whistled through the rusty subway supports, and the concrete overpass hummed with the ceaseless drone of impatient traffic. Beneath the dimly lit streetlights, long shadows stretched across grimy brick walls and graffiti-covered dumpsters. People hurried past the alleyway entrance, some in elegant coats, others in fast food uniforms, none sparing a glance. A woman in a sleek coat instinctively tightened her grip on her purse as she passed a huddled figure by the wall. A man in a blue delivery jacket cast a brief look, then turned away muttering dismissively about, "Those street kids always begging." That huddled figure wasn't begging. He was meticulously repairing his bicycle. Elijah, a slender 12-year-old with sun-kissed brown skin and thick, dark curls restrained by a frayed bandana, wore an oversized, grease-stained gray hoodie and jeans 2 sizes too big, cinched at the waist with a broken bungee cord. His sneakers were mismatched. His small yet calloused hands skillfully manipulated a bent fork and a flattened soda can, adjusting the bike chain he'd salvaged from a junk pile the previous week. Duct tape held the seat together and a dented milk crate bolted to the back served as his mobile storage unit. Every item held a narrative, none of them pleasant. He wasn't truly invisible. People saw him. They simply chose not to acknowledge him. Sometimes they'd mutter, "Get a job," or "Where's your mother?" Other times they'd cross the street. Last winter, when he was caught napping on a bench, the plaza's security guard sprayed cold water on the seat, telling him to go bother someone else. The words no longer carried the sting they once did. Elijah no longer attended school. After his mother's death in a hit-and-run 2 years prior, and with no relatives stepping forward, he had fled the shelter system. Too many conflicts, too many regulations. He preferred the freedom of sleeping against a cold brick wall, breathing freely, rather than lying awake in a room where he was merely a number. He had mastered the art of silence, of avoiding direct eye contact, of making a $1 stretch for 4 days. Yet every night before curling into a corner behind the laundromat or beneath the viaduct, he would gaze up through the city's hazy glow and whisper, "You still up there, Ma?" His fingers would instinctively tighten around the one tangible link he had left, a faded red scarf knitted by her hands, still faintly scented with lavender and her old perfume. It remained in his pocket always. This night felt familiar yet subtly different. As Elijah secured the final link of his chain, tightening it with a piece of wire, a distant siren wailed somewhere in the city. Something was already amiss. He didn't know it yet, but by tomorrow his name would grace the front page of every newspaper in the city, not as a suspect, not as a street kid, but as an unexpected hero. By the time the sun dipped below the skyline, Elijah had pedaled into the loop, expertly navigating between clusters of honking cars and flashing orange lights. The air here was heavier, thick with the smell of exhaust, burnt pretzels and damp concrete. The streets throbbed with impatience. Office workers spilled from revolving glass doors, phones pressed to their ears, sidestepping puddles in their designer shoes. Food trucks lined the curb and a saxophonist on the corner struggled to be heard above the traffic's roar. No one paid attention. Elijah kept his gaze down, hood up. He recognized the expressions some people wore, a blend of fear and disdain, the kind that made him wish he could vanish. He wasn't there to beg or loiter. He had learned when to blend in and when to disappear. Today he simply needed to get past the downtown strip before the buses disgorged the evening crowd and transformed the bike lanes into a nightmare. But fate, as it often does with those who least expect it, had other plans. The red light at State and Monroe was, as always, interminable. Elijah glided to a halt just before the crosswalk, feet on the ground, head tilted slightly. Up ahead, in the middle of the intersection, stood a tall white traffic officer in a neon vest, arms raised, shouting over the din of car horns. The man looked utterly spent, his face flushed, his voice strained, as if he were on the verge of abandoning all hope for humanity. He waved a delivery van forward, then turned to reprimand a sedan that had stopped beyond the line. Elijah watched silently with the wary curiosity of a dog observing a stranger, braced for disappointment. Then it happened. A deafening roar, the shriek of tires, and a silver SUV hurtled through the opposite lane, swerving violently as if the driver had yanked the wheel at the last second. People on the sidewalk screamed. The traffic cop turned, hands barely raised, before the vehicle slammed into him with brutal force. His body lifted, spun in midair and struck the asphalt like a sack of bricks. The SUV lurched, fishtailed and accelerated away down the street. Everything paused for a single heartbeat. The entire intersection froze. Elijah sat there, mouth slightly agape, watching as the officer lay twisted in the middle of the road, one arm flung at an unnatural angle, blood pooling beneath him. The crowd began to stir again. Some gasped, others pulled out their phones, a few turned away. No one stepped into the street. No one. Elijah's breath hitched. His grip on the handlebars tightened. He could hear his own heart thudding above the chaos. Every instinct screamed at him to stay out of it. He understood how this worked. A black boy in a hoodie, hands covered in blood, hovering over a white cop in the middle of downtown. That wasn't a headline, it was a death sentence. He could already envision the handcuffs, the shouts, the phone cameras capturing the worst possible angle. He could already hear the slurs. Punk, criminal, thug. He knew what they would see. Not a child, not a helper, just another body they didn't trust. But then a memory pierced through the fear. His mother's voice, soft yet firm as it used to be when she braided his hair or buttoned his coat before school. You don't get to choose how the world sees you, baby. You only get to choose who you are. Don't ever let them harden your heart. Be good even if they ain't. His throat tightened. He looked up. No one had moved. The officer groaned once, his chest rising shallowly, blood flowing freely from a gash near his elbow. One shoe had been flung off. His radio lay crushed beneath him. Elijah's jaw clenched. The light changed to green. He dropped the bike without a word. He ran into the street, weaving between the stopped cars as horns erupted. A few people shouted, "Kid, get out of there." But he didn't stop. He knelt beside the officer and winced at the sight. A broken arm, perhaps a cracked rib, blood thickening on the concrete. Elijah knew little about first aid, but he recognized when someone was dying and this man was fading fast. He pulled the red scarf from his pocket, his mother's. It still carried her faint scent like a whisper. He pressed it to the man's wound and wrapped it tightly, tying it with hands that trembled but did not hesitate. Blood seeped through almost instantly, warm and horrifying. The officer's face twitched. A groan escaped his lips. "You hear me?" Elijah whispered, his voice trembling. "You're going to be okay. Just hang on." No answer, just a wet, rattling breath. Elijah's eyes darted to the sidewalk. People were watching now, some filming, still none came closer. A woman in a blazer shook her head and murmured, "Where are the paramedics?" A man behind her whispered, "That kid touched him. Did you see? He touched him." Elijah's heart sank, but he didn't move. "Don't stop. Just finish what you started." A siren cried faintly in the distance, far off, nowhere near. He had to get help. Real help. He looked back at his bike lying in the street. The chain had slipped, no time to fix it. He took one last look at the officer, pressed the scarf tighter against the wound and whispered, "I'm not leaving you, I swear. I'm just going to get someone." And then he ran. Not toward the crowd, not toward the nearest business where someone might have already called 911. He sprinted down Monroe, cutting through alleys and across parking lots, heading toward a traffic outpost he remembered seeing earlier, just a few blocks away. His legs burned. He didn't slow. Behind him, the city swallowed the siren, the crowd, the wounded man. But Elijah ran as if his soul depended on it, as if he could just get there in time, none of the rest would matter. What he didn't know, what he couldn't know, was that the hardest part wasn't behind him. It was waiting just one street away, and no matter how fast he ran, he couldn't outrun what this city had already decided he looked like. Elijah's lungs burned as he pushed through the final block. The traffic outpost was just ahead. A concrete booth wedged between two blinking street signs, flanked by orange cones and faded caution tape. Two officers stood outside, one with a clipboard, the other sipping coffee, both mid-conversation and laughing at something Elijah couldn't hear. He staggered to a stop, chest heaving, sweat running cold down his back despite the evening chill. His voice cracked as he shouted, There's a cop hurt. He got hit on Monroe by a car. He's bleeding bad. The two officers straightened, their smiles vanishing. One stepped forward, already reaching for his radio. Where exactly? Right at the light. State and Monroe, Elijah said breathlessly, pointing back the way he came. He's in the street. He's not moving. The younger officer nodded and barked into his radio, voice clipped and professional. Unit down at State and Monroe, requesting immediate medics and backup. Possible hit-and-run victim is CPD, repeat CPD down. The other officer turned to Elijah, his eyes sharp and assessing. You saw it happen? Elijah hesitated, wiped his bloody hands on his jeans. I didn't see the crash. I was across the street. But I ran to help him. I tied his arm. He was bleeding. I used this. He reached into his pocket slowly, deliberately, and held up the scarf. It was soaked, dark red, twisted and clotted. It's mine. I tried to stop the bleeding. The officer's face tightened. He didn't nod, didn't say thank you. His gaze drifted to Elijah's hoodie, his scuffed shoes, the dirt under his fingernails, the blood smeared across his palms, then to his face, that untrusting, measuring stare, like trying to solve a puzzle where the pieces didn't quite fit. Stay right here, he said flatly. Don't move. I'm not. Within minutes they were back at the scene. Flashing lights painted the buildings blue and red. A small crowd had formed, cordoned off by yellow tape and an officer barking orders. Elijah ran beside the two patrolmen, heart racing with a mix of hope and dread, hoping the officer was still alive. He saw the man still on the pavement, though someone had repositioned him slightly. A paramedic hovered over him, inserting in 4. Another medic looked up as they approached. Massive blunt force trauma. Lost a lot of blood. Might have severed a vein in the forearm. That scarf, the younger officer beside Elijah said suddenly, pointing. Is that it? The medic nodded. Yeah, whoever tied it probably bought him time. Elijah exhaled, something like relief catching in his throat. But then the older officer stepped between him and the scene. You said you found him like that? Yes, sir. And you tied the arm? Yes, with my scarf. I didn't hurt him. I just tried to help. Then why the hell's your DNA all over a downed cop? The voice didn't rise, but the threat behind it did. I told you I helped. I've got no idea. I don't no address. I live around. You're telling me a kid with no home just happened to be there right when an officer gets hit, right when the driver flees? You expect me to believe that? The words hit harder than any punch. Elijah's mouth opened but no sound came out. His hands were still sticky with the man's blood. The scarf, his mother's, was now bagged by a crime tech. He saw someone taking pictures of it like evidence. The older officer stepped closer. Turn around. What? Turn around? I didn't do anything. Then you got nothing to hide, do you? The younger one looked unsure, glancing from his partner to the EMTs. Maybe we wait. No, we do this now. Hand on his shoulder, grip firm, turned him. Cold metal on his wrists. Click click. Gasps came from the onlookers. A woman muttered, Jesus, they're arresting the kid. Another man whispered, that can't be right, he's just a kid. But no one stepped forward, not one voice rose louder than a murmur. The cuffs bit into Elijah's wrists as he was led away from the flashing lights, away from the man he had tried to save, away from the scarf, the only thing he had left of his mother. He didn't cry. He didn't shout. He'd learned a long time ago that black boys who raise their voices don't get hurt. They get handled. At the squad car he tried once, just once. I didn't hurt him. I saved him. The older officer snorted. We'll see what the evidence says. Elijah sat in the back seat, heart pounding, throat dry, watching the skyline shrink as they pulled away. He wasn't angry yet, not fully. Mostly he felt the deep, familiar ache of being unseen, unheard, judged before he even got to explain. He thought of his mother, her voice in his head telling him to do the right thing. Be good even if they ain't. He had done what she asked. He had done everything right. And still here he was, in cuffs, with a record maybe about to be written in ink he couldn't erase. At the station no one met him with empathy. They took his hoodie, his shoes, fingerprinted him. When he told them again what happened, they wrote it down like they were logging an excuse. When he asked if the officer was alive, no one answered. He sat alone in a pale gray holding room, no windows, fluorescent light flickering, a chair and a metal bench. Cold steel pressed against his skin. He rubbed his thumb over the spot where the scarf used to rest in his pocket. It was gone now, probably bagged and tagged like some clue from a crime scene. He closed his eyes, not to sleep, just to escape. And that's when the shame came in, not for helping but for hoping. Hoping they'd see him. Hoping someone would say thank you. Hoping being decent was enough to keep the world from turning on you. He should have known better. But still, if given the choice again, he wasn't sure he'd do it differently. The fluorescent lights in the holding cell buzzed overhead, a sound Elijah had grown accustomed to in the last few hours, but still couldn't block out. The bench beneath him was cold, unforgiving, as if it were meant to remind you that comfort wasn't part of this place. He sat with his back against the wall, arms folded, eyes vacant. They'd taken his hoodie, his scarf, his voice. No one had spoken to him in over an hour. No lawyer, no social worker, just stares. Some suspicious, some empty, most avoiding him altogether, like he was a smudge on the floor no one wanted to clean. A female officer had handed him a plastic cup of water earlier, but she didn't say a word, just placed it on the metal table and left. Elijah didn't drink it. His mouth was dry, but something in him refused the gesture, not out of pride but survival. When the world only gives you scraps, you learn to stop taking handouts that come without humanity. He didn't want their pity. He wanted someone to listen. He replayed the moments in his head over and over. The screech, the slam, the blood, the silence, the way the officer looked up at him, barely conscious, the way his fingers had twitched when Elijah tied the scarf around his arm. That had to mean something. Someone saw. Someone had to have seen what he did. But the more he thought about it, the more it felt like hope was slipping through cracks he couldn't seal. The door opened. A sharp click of boots. A woman in a tan coat, early 30s maybe, stepped in holding a clipboard. Her badge read Detective Marquez. She didn't sit. She leaned against the table, eyes scanning him like a puzzle she didn't have all the pieces for. Elijah, right? Her voice wasn't cruel, but it wasn't soft either. He nodded barely. You know why you're here? I didn't hurt him, he said, eyes finally locking with hers. I helped. I've read the initial report, she said. Officer said you arrived at the outpost alone, hands covered in blood, claimed a cop had been hit. You gave them a scarf as evidence. Your scarf. It wasn't evidence. It was his tourniquet, Elijah said. He was bleeding. I wrapped his arm. I told them. I know, she replied, flipping a page. But you see the problem, right? No witnesses, no cameras caught the impact, just the aftermath. You next to him covered in blood. That's all we've got. Elijah's voice trembled now, not from fear, but from the weight of everything being turned backward. You think I would do that and then come tell you? She looked up at him and for a second something changed. Her gaze softened just a little. I didn't say I think you did. But I'm not the only one asking questions. He leaned forward now, chest tight. Is he alive? Pause. He's in critical condition. Lost a lot of blood. Surgery took hours. He's sedated now but stable. Elijah sank back, a breath he didn't know he'd been holding finally escaping his lips. He's going to make it? If nothing changes overnight, yes. Silence stretched between them. She stood straight and moved to the door, hand on the knob. Before leaving, she turned and said, I'll be back in the morning. If you think of anything else, anything that might help, now's the time. I already told you everything, Elijah whispered, more to himself than her, but she heard it. The door clicked shut behind her. Meanwhile, on the 5th floor of Mercy Hospital, in a room flooded with sterile light and hushed urgency, the officer lay in bed, pale, unconscious. A tube down his throat and 4 in each arm. Machines beeped, steady and calm now, like the worst had passed. But the battle hadn't ended. A nurse adjusted the blanket at his feet. Another checked the monitors and noted vitals on a clipboard. No one spoke. Then at just past 5:12 a.m. his eyelids flickered. It was subtle, the kind of motion you might miss if you weren't trained to catch signs of consciousness. The nurse moved closer, leaned in. Detective Moran, she said softly. His lips parted, breath catching. His eyes opened slowly, adjusting to the light. Panic flickered in his face for a moment before he seemed to realize he was in a hospital. You're safe, she said quickly. You're in Mercy. You were in an accident. You've had surgery. You're okay. He blinked, swallowed, winced. Do you remember what happened? She asked. He nodded weakly. His voice was gravel. Car hit me. Yes, a hit and run. He struggled to speak. She handed him a small pad and pen. His hand trembled as he scrawled a few words. The boy. Where is he? The nurse blinked. Boy? What boy? He nodded, tapped the notepad again. He helped me, she hesitated. They brought in a young suspect. You mean him? He looked at her like she'd missed the point of the world entirely. He saved me, he wrote next, pressing harder with the pen. Within the hour, the ICU's call reached the precinct. It traveled quickly from nurse to attending, from attending to admin, from admin to Marquez. The moment she read the note forwarded by the hospital, she grabbed her keys and didn't stop moving until she was back at the precinct, shoving through the door to the holding area, ignoring the puzzled looks from night shift officers. Elijah, she called, and he jerked his head up. She walked toward the cell, holding the printout in one hand. He woke up. He wrote a statement. Said you saved his life. Not hurt. Not fled. Saved. Elijah stared at her. It didn't register at first. What? She unlocked the door herself. You're not under arrest anymore. Let's get you out of here. He stood, slow, still uncertain if this was real. So they believe me? She nodded. He believes you. And that's what matters. As she led him out of the holding area, past the desks and tired cops and hollow conversations, Elijah didn't smile. He didn't cry. He just walked quietly, his footsteps light but not from relief. He wasn't free yet, not really. Not until people saw more than blood, more than a hoodie, more than the color of his skin. But for the first time in a long time, someone had looked past all that and believed him. By mid-morning, the city had begun to shift. It started with whispers. Someone on the hospital staff had posted anonymously on social media. The officer who was hit downtown yesterday woke up and said the kid who saved his life is being held in custody. He said, quote, he didn't hurt me, he saved me. The post exploded. Within hours it was everywhere. On news tickers, on Twitter, on local live streams. A photo of Elijah, grainy and taken from a phone through the glass of a squad car, circulated with captions ranging from boy hero wrongly accused, to from suspect to savior. But Elijah didn't know any of this when he stepped out of the precinct just after noon, wearing a plain gray hoodie a size too big that someone had loaned him, and no shoes, he hadn't gotten those back yet. Detective Marquez walked beside him. Do you have somewhere to go? She asked carefully, her tone gentler than before. Elijah shook his head, then shrugged. I usually stay under the bridge on Harrison, but it's loud there. Hard to sleep. She paused, unsure how to respond to that kind of honesty. I'll see if we can get you into housing, maybe a center, one of the better ones. You should have a safe place tonight. He didn't answer. The sunlight felt foreign on his face after the windowless cell. He kept walking, hands in his sleeves, quiet, watching his feet on the concrete. They passed a bakery, and the smell of cinnamon and butter nearly brought tears to his eyes. His stomach growled. Marquez noticed. You hungry? She asked. He hesitated, then nodded once without lifting his head. I stopped for food. She ordered pancakes and sausage for him, black coffee for herself. He ate in silence, slow and cautious at first, then faster. She didn't ask questions, just watched. Then finally asked, You sure you don't have anyone? Family. Hi, Mom, he said quietly. She died a while ago. No father. No idea who he is. The detective sighed softly. You're 12. He nodded. I've got a nephew your age. Complains if his phone charger isn't the right length. Elijah gave a faint smile, just a flicker, then went back to his plate. When they arrived at the hospital later that afternoon, the lobby was already swarming with press. The mayor's aide was giving a statement. Reporters jostled for position, but they all turned when the automatic doors slid open and a boy walked in beside a detective. The room quieted. Cameras turned. Elijah froze. Marquez placed a hand on his shoulder. You okay? No, he said honestly. You want to leave? No. Then just breathe. She led him through the crowd. Hospital security cleared the path. At the end of the hallway, in a private room lined with flowers and cards and get-well balloons, Officer Moran sat propped up, one arm in a cast, the other resting across his lap. He looked older than before, not from the injury, but from the weight of what had almost been lost. When Elijah entered, the room felt smaller, heavier. Moran looked up. For a long beat he didn't speak. Then his voice cracked slightly as he said, "That you?" Elijah nodded. "I remember you. You were the only one who came." "I tied your arm," Elijah murmured, "with my mom's scarf. You saved my life, kid." The officer blinked hard. "They told me what happened after. I'm sorry. You didn't deserve that." Elijah looked down at the floor. "It happens." Moran's brow tightened. "It shouldn't." The room fell quiet. Then slowly the officer reached out his unbroken hand. "Come here." Elijah hesitated, then stepped forward, and Moran pulled him into a brief, one-armed hug. The cameras didn't catch this part. It wasn't for them. It was for the boy and the man, two people from different worlds who had collided in a single moment of pain and grace. The official ceremony came 3 days later, held on the steps of City Hall. The mayor, the chief of police, and a line of uniformed officers stood before a crowd of hundreds. Schools had let out early. News crews filmed from every angle. And in the middle of the steps, wearing a donated suit that didn't quite fit and new shoes that were still too stiff, Elijah stood with hands clasped, trying not to fidget. The scarf was in his pocket again, cleaned, pressed, and returned. The police had offered to frame it. Elijah had said no. The mayor leaned toward the microphone. "Today we recognize not just a heroic act, but a reminder that courage doesn't always wear a badge or carry a title. Sometimes, courage is a boy with nothing to gain, nothing to prove, and everything to risk who chooses to act anyway." Elijah barely heard the applause that followed. He stood still, heart pounding, staring out at the crowd. Some faces smiled, others watched with curiosity. But he wasn't thinking about them. He was thinking about his mom, about her voice. Be good even if they ain't. And now, maybe for the first time, someone had finally seen the boy she raised. Later that evening, as the sun dipped behind the skyline, Elijah sat on the steps, the crowd long gone. Marquez walked up beside him, handed him a soda. "You did good today. I didn't like the speeches." "You didn't have to. You weren't there to impress them." He looked up at her. "So what happens now?" "You'll have choices. People want to help. I'll make sure you're not back on the street tonight. After that, we figure it out. You've earned that." He looked out at the city lights flickering on like stars waking up. "Do you think they'll forget me?" he asked. She shook her head. "Not a chance." But even if they did, he knew now that he wouldn't forget himself. And maybe that was what mattered most. He wasn't just a shadow anymore. He wasn't just another face in a system that never asked his name. He had a story now, a name, a moment that no one could take. Elijah. The boy who stayed, the boy who saved, the boy who was finally seen.